Welcome to Nucleus, the podcast covering America's top leaders in business and culture. I'm your host, Tripwire. Today on the show, how one visionary executive transformed a scrappy video platform into a global phenomenon, reaching half the world's population. YouTube just wrapped up one of the most consequential leadership transitions in tech history, and almost nobody noticed. When Susan Wojcicki stepped down as CEO in February 2023, after 9 years running the platform, it marked the end of an era that transformed how 2 billion people consume video content. But here's what's wild. While her male counterparts got magazine covers and documentary series, Wojcicki quietly built YouTube into a $28 billion revenue machine, while navigating content moderation challenges that would have destroyed lesser leaders. She turned a money-losing acquisition facing billion-dollar lawsuits into a cultural institution that pays out more money to creators than the entire music industry generates in revenue. And she did it while raising 5 kids and dealing with impossible questions like, should we ban the president? And how do we stop radicalization without becoming thought police? If you want to understand platform leadership in the 2020s, you need to understand how Wojcicki pulled this off. So who is Susan Wojcicki? Before she became CEO, she was Google employee number 16. But here's the origin story that sounds made up. Google was literally founded in her garage. In 1998, she'd just bought a house in Menlo Park with a mortgage she was struggling to afford. So she rented her garage to 2 Stanford PhD students named Larry Page and Sergey Brin for $1,700 a month. They were building a search engine. She watched them work from her kitchen, got convinced they were onto something massive, and asked to join. She was pregnant with her first kid at the time. Leaving stable corporate jobs at Intel and consulting firms to join an uncertain startup while expecting a baby, that's the first data point in understanding her risk calculus. She became Google's first marketing manager and spent the next 7 years building their advertising empire. But the decision that defined her career came in 2006. Google had built its own video platform called Google Video, and it was failing spectacularly. Meanwhile, this scrappy startup called YouTube was exploding with growth, but hemorrhaging money and facing a $1 billion copyright lawsuit from Viacom. Most people at Google wanted to keep building their own product. Wojcicki looked at the data and said, we need to acquire YouTube for $1.65 billion. People thought she was insane. That was Google's largest acquisition ever, for a company with $15 million in revenue and existential legal problems. But she saw what others missed. Video search would become as important as web search, and YouTube had already won the market position battle. The recommendation algorithm and user engagement metrics told a story that balance sheets couldn't. That acquisition decision reveals her entire leadership philosophy. She's not the flashy visionary who sells you on flying cars. She's the operator who looks at unglamorous data, sees the pattern, and makes the billion-dollar bet everyone else is too scared to make. For the next 8 years, she ran YouTube from behind the scenes, solving the 2 problems everyone said were impossible: copyright protection and monetization. The copyright issue required inventing an entirely new technology called Content ID that could scan every video uploaded against a database of copyrighted material and give rights holders options to block, track, or monetize. This wasn't just hard, it was hundreds of millions of dollars and years of engineering hard. But it transformed YouTube's relationship with media companies from adversarial to partnership. Rights holders went from suing YouTube to making billions from user-generated content on the platform.
My name is Tom Sachs. I'm an artist in New York City. For nearly 2 decades, I have been collaborating with Nike.
Nike running is for runners, Nike basketball is for basketball. Nike craft is for everyone else.
The monetization challenge was equally brutal. YouTube was burning cash on bandwidth costs with no clear path to profitability. Wojcicki built an advertising model from scratch that worked for video, which is fundamentally different from search or display ads. She introduced skippable ads, where advertisers only paid if people actually watched, which sounds obvious now, but was revolutionary then. And here's the move that created the creator economy. She gave creators 55% of ad revenue. That split was unheard of. It meant YouTube made less per view, but it turned millions of people into business partners who had skin in the game. By 2012, YouTube finally became profitable. By the time she became CEO in 2014, the platform had 1 billion users and a sustainable business model. But becoming CEO meant inheriting a new category of impossible problems. Content moderation at scale makes copyright lawsuits look simple. In 2017, major advertisers discovered their ads running next to concerning content and videos exploiting children. They pulled billions in spending overnight. This is what the industry calls an adpocalypse, and it's basically a near-death experience for an advertising-supported platform. Wojcicki's response showed how she operates under pressure. She didn't make excuses or deflect. She published detailed blog posts explaining exactly what YouTube would do. Hire 10,000 content moderators, implement aggressive policies against concerning speech and problematic content, adjust the recommendation algorithm to reduce borderline content. She made the algorithm changes even though they hurt watch time metrics in the short term, because she understood that losing advertiser trust would be fatal. Here's where it gets messy, and this is important. These decisions satisfied nobody. Creators felt policies were inconsistent and opaque. Conservatives accused YouTube of censorship. Progressives said they weren't doing enough. Researchers published papers claiming the recommendation algorithm was a radicalization pipeline. Wojcicki testified before Congress and got pressured from all sides. She removed millions of videos for COVID misinformation, including from doctors whose views later entered mainstream debate. There's no clean narrative here. Platform governance at 2 billion user scale requires choosing between bad options. What's notable is that Wojcicki was transparent about the trade-offs. She didn't pretend there were perfect answers. She articulated principles, made calls, adjusted based on outcomes, and communicated reasoning, even when people hated the decisions. Then, TikTok showed up and threatened to make YouTube irrelevant with teenagers. This is 2019, and suddenly every young person is watching short vertical videos instead of YouTube's long-form content. Wojcicki could have dismissed it as a fad. Instead, she launched YouTube Shorts in 2020, essentially copying TikTok's format and integrating it into the main app. Was it derivative? Absolutely. Was it necessary? Completely. Shorts hit 50 billion daily views within 2 years. She was willing to potentially cannibalize YouTube's own long-form content to defend market position. That's strategic courage. It's also a tacit admission that even dominant platforms can't rest on network effects alone. So what can we learn from Wojcicki's approach? 3 principles stand out. First, solve the hard problem everyone else is avoiding. When she pushed for the YouTube acquisition, the conventional wisdom was that user-generated video couldn't be monetized, and copyright issues were unsolvable. She bet hundreds of millions on building technology to solve both. Content ID became a competitive moat because it was so difficult to build that competitors couldn't replicate it. This aligns with what strategists call barrier-building innovation. You don't just create a product. You create the infrastructure that makes your business model viable and prevents others from copying you. The lesson: identify the constraint that's blocking your entire industry, then invest disproportionately in solving it. That becomes your unfair advantage. Second, treat your suppliers like partners, not resources. YouTube's creator revenue split was economically irrational in the short term. Wojcicki could have kept 70 or 80%, and creators would have still participated because there was no alternative. But the 55% split created loyalty and aligned incentives in a way that built a moat. Creators invested in building audiences on YouTube rather than hedging across platforms. They advocated for YouTube in public discourse. They innovated new content formats that kept viewers engaged. This is platform economics, but it's also just smart stakeholder management. When you share upside generously, you create partners who are invested in your success. The math works because you're expanding the pie, not just claiming a bigger slice. Third, make the unpopular decision when data tells you it's right. Wojcicki changed the recommendation algorithm in 2019 to reduce promotion of borderline content, even though it decreased watch time by hundreds of millions of hours. That's a terrifying decision when your primary metric is engagement. But she understood that optimizing purely for watch time was creating long-term risk to advertiser relationships and regulatory scrutiny. She traded short-term metrics for long-term sustainability. This is where most leaders fail. They know the right call, but the political cost or quarterly impact stops them. Wojcicki consistently demonstrated willingness to take heat for decisions she believed were correct. When YouTube Premium's original content strategy wasn't working, she killed it and refocused on creator content. When the separate YouTube gaming app failed to compete with Twitch, she shut it down and integrated gaming into the main app. No sunk cost fallacy, no ego protection, just adjust based on outcomes. The broader framework here is what business scholars call multi-stakeholder optimization under constraints. YouTube isn't optimizing for one variable. It's balancing creator satisfaction, viewer engagement, advertiser brand safety, rights holder copyright protection, and regulatory compliance. These objectives often conflict. More aggressive content moderation makes advertisers happy, but angers creators. Looser policies increase engagement, but create brand safety risks. Wojcicki's approach was to be explicit about these trade-offs, establish principles for making calls, and communicate reasoning transparently. She didn't pretend conflicts didn't exist. That transparency built trust, even when specific decisions were unpopular. Here's what's fascinating about her stepping down. She left at the peak of YouTube's success to focus on family after personal tragedies. That's almost unheard of in Silicon Valley, where executives typically get pushed out or leave for bigger opportunities. She demonstrated that you can define success on your own terms, even in a culture that worships total commitment to the mission. There's a leadership lesson there, too. Knowing when enough is enough, and that building a meaningful life requires trade-offs, even at the top. So what can you take from Wojcicki's playbook? 3 things. First, the hardest problem in your space is probably your biggest opportunity. Everyone avoids it because it's expensive and uncertain, which means solving it creates a structural advantage. Second, share economics generously with the people who create value in your ecosystem. It feels expensive upfront, but compounds into loyalty and network effects you can't buy. Third, optimize for long-term sustainability over short-term metrics, even when it hurts. The quarterly hit you take for the right strategic decision is almost always worth it. The bottom line? Leadership at scale isn't about having all the answers. It's about making tough calls with incomplete information, owning the trade-offs, and adjusting based on outcomes. Wojcicki ran YouTube for 9 years through content crises that would have broken most leaders. She didn't do it with charisma or vision speeches. She did it with data, discipline, and the courage to make decisions that satisfied nobody, but moved the platform forward. That's the kind of leadership that actually builds things that last. Thank you for listening to Nucleus. You can show our podcast team some love with 5 stars and a follow. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Grab News. Thomas.